I'm going to ask you, if you could for a second, to engage with me in a very simple activity. You don't have to go anywhere or do anything in particular, but you do need to use the hand that you usually use that's most comfortable to you. You may want to loosen it just a little bit. Are you familiar with something called fist to five? Okay, so let's learn fist to five for just a moment. Fist means, I never heard of this before. It sounds Chinese, and it might have just come off the boat yesterday. Five means I'm so comfortable with this, I could actually explain it to everybody else in the room. And then there's a range in between. So in other words, if you're sort of familiar with it, you might want to say one or two. If it sounds pretty good, but I'm just not quite ready to get up and talk about it in front of everybody, then maybe a 3 or a 4. Okay? So if everybody could self-assess on the words formative assessment. If it sounds like a foreign language and you have no idea what it's about, please be honest, because it gives me good feedback. Please put a fist or a 1. If it's something you feel pretty good about, and maybe you could even explain it somewhere 3, 4, and 5. If you could kindly just do that for a minute, put your responses over here. Okay? You don't have to show off and waving it, making noises. Just right over here, please. And be honest. It's better for me to know what who I'm really talking to, and whatnot. Okay? If everyone over here could also kindly respond, I'd appreciate it. Oh, that's fine. Okay. Okay, so I got a few people with more than one, a bunch of fists, and so we're in it together, everybody. All right, this is a collective effort. Okay, you actually just engaged in a form of formative assessment. Okay, and we're going to try to give you practical examples of that. All right, so formative assessment. This is not the definition, but it is something for you to keep in mind. It's assessment with a purpose, a different type of purpose, perhaps, than you're typically used to thinking. Normally, when we think of assessment, it has sort of this end of unit feel to it. We utilize it at the end of a week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. We've taught X amount of content and material, and now we're going to assess student mastery after that time. The problem with that is manifold. Number one, you're not necessarily, if that's all you do, which I doubt that's all you do, but in theory, if that's all one were to do, then you're not getting the feedback as you are going. And sort of there's this blind process where you're just moving forward, using the words I hate, but I use it all the time because we use it all the time, covering ground, right? Marching through my curriculum, making sure I can turn to the administration by the time that I'm done and say, I finished my curricular expectations, I have met all of those, right? You can say your video, if you will, with Bikurim, that I've completed everything that you've asked me to do. At least in theory, I've completed everything you asked me to do. But let's take a look at a quote and see if, in fact, that's going to change our perspective a little bit. Okay? Let's do this as a think, pair, share, which, by the way, is another technique we could use. Familiar with that? Anyone who would give themselves a 4 or 5 that wants to briefly tell us what a think, pair, share is? Yes, please?
You ask your students to turn to the person next to them and verbalize their thoughts on a particular topic briefly for the amount of time you state, and then the other person has a chance, and formulating your thoughts helps you engage in your classwork, helps you begin writing, things like that.
Excellent. One piece, if I may add, on the front end is the think part. Okay, now you're all familiar, I'm sure, if not by the name, at least the concept, Howard Gardner and the multiple intelligences, different ways we think and process, modalities, all that good stuff, right? We typically, there's a different conversation, different workshop really, on understanding the way people think and understand how can we adjust our form of presentation in order to meet the needs of various learners in our classroom, right? We typically are very verbal, often out of necessity. Right? We have to cover ground. And the fastest way to do that, of course, is to just tell you everything you need to learn. And that would be great if my mouth and the students' brains were connected with a USB cable. That would be awesome, right? Although today's technicalities notwithstanding, but you get the idea. If I could just port it right into your brain, that would be fantastic. But it doesn't work that way. Actually, it wouldn't be so fantastic because there's no human dimension to it. But there's a real learning process that has to happen. So we have to think about it in such terms. So think, pair, share would be, you think about a question, you think about it usually, let's say 30, 60 seconds, whatever is appropriate. You pair with the person sitting next to you. Still not working, that's okay. And then you share it with somebody else. So the think is what we call intrapersonal. Intrapersonal means you actually get some time to think about it, which I think in today's day and age is actually something we underutilize in the classrooms and in life, especially if children are used to just talking and sharing and sharing and sharing. There isn't a lot of time to actually think about what we're sharing. It seems very shallow oftentimes, those communications. And then you have the interpersonal piece. And different people are wired differently. Different people, some people really like to think about it and sort of own it. And some people learn best by sharing it. So you give them both aspects to it. So here's the question. What is this person saying? I'm going to ask you to read the quote. And what are the implications specific to education? So please read it on your own. Please think about it. And then please turn to somebody next to you, discuss it, and then I'm going to ask for some volunteers to share some insights. All right, any volunteers to share some thoughts about what you discussed? Some general impressions? Please.
We were just saying that it's easier said than done.
Can you elaborate? By the way, I may do that to you. I may actually ask you to take me to the next step here, so please be ready. Yes, what do you mean?
That we understand that, of course, it's not, our goal is in learning, not in teaching. And how do we be more creative doing that? Okay, so I'm hearing an interest in maybe some additional tools and strategies. Okay, that's what we're going to focus on. Excellent, thank you. Yes?
I think a lot can come from the students themselves.
Okay.
So once you teach something, they come back with examples of real life, which
Okay.
really brings that. You could either say, this is an interesting thing, or this is not exactly, or this is one way, and they
Is
apply
there
it.
something you have in mind in particular? Give us an example of what you mean.
I can't think. I teach Parish Tefillah, and
Okay.
and sometimes we get to. I teach on Shabbos, and there's a lot of Hashkaf on Shabbos, and then the girls apply it to their actual Shabbos, to their actual davening, to their actual thinking,
Right.
which makes the tefillah that we have just translated and explained come
So they're
down to them.
are you saying that they're learning through your teaching, meaning to say they're taking it to the next level by internalizing?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, excellent. Yes.
To me, like a part of it, and maybe I'm wrong, there's like a very individual thing that each teacher needs to do, but it also has to be like a global atmosphere.
Okay.
A lot of us say that like our students have a hard time when we attempt to do this.
Mhm.
The students need to be interested in actually doing it for this type of learning to work.
Creating more student accountability and ownership. Is that what you mean?
Or spirit.
Desire for
There's a lot of pushback from the kids when you push them.
To do something. Okay. I'm getting used to this. I feel like this is a racetrack. The horses are going to come out of the stable in a moment. Yes, please. Use that any way you want. Okay, yes.
So piggybacking on what my colleague just said, and what I heard before you walked in the room.
Yes.
The girls want to talk. If we,
Really?
Yeah, if we frame it educationally, if we tell them before class starts, I'm trying a new pattern here, there will be time that you will talk about topics with each other, then you're kind of giving them an outlet for the thing they want to do anyhow, which is disrupting your class anyhow, but you're the one in control telling them what they can talk about, and then you have to hold them accountable, like someone has to share it or write about it, but so even if it's just your own little global universe of 42 minutes, you can set the tone.
Okay, so that sounds like a great introduction for my cooperative learning session. But yeah, that's true. I mean, we definitely want to channel the inner whatever of our students in a positive direction to make sure that they're properly engaged. Okay, so I think, coming back to the initial comment, if I may, so that we can really move the conversation forward, we recognize fundamentally that teaching and learning do not necessarily correlate as perfectly as we would like, right? I could say that I taught it, but does that mean that the students have actually learned it? Now granted, if there's a lack of receptivity on the side of our students, we have to ask ourselves, well, why is that so? And what can we do about it, right? It is our responsibility on top of everything else, and I realize there's a lot in those words, to be an engaging teacher. In other words, it's our responsibility to find them where they are and try to bring them to a better place in terms of content, skills, hashkafos, whatever those might be. That is who we are. We're not just there to walk in, give over content, let's call it, and walk out. I'm sure nobody does that. But we have to be creating an environment. But let's even say, if I may for just a second, let's even say receptivity is not the issue. We still have to be asking ourselves, have the students who are trying to learn, have the students whose mindset is in the right place, whose commitment is there, but they just don't always get it, or always get it the way that we presented it. And so sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what can we do minimally to ensure that the learning has actually occurred? You know, I oftentimes say that we are mislabeled professionally. We call ourselves teachers, we're called teachers, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. But I oftentimes think we'd be better served called facilitators of learning, which doesn't sound so easy. I know it doesn't roll off the tongue, I get it. But in terms of what we're here to do, we're not here just to share, we're here to ensure the learning occurs. So whether it's through the strategies that we utilize or just the mindset, right? And can I walk out of class every day with some degree of awareness? It may not be pinpoint exactly, but some type of feedback on a regular basis in every class that my students are learning and mastering what I'm intending for them to learn. And if not, where does that leave me? Right? Does that therefore mean, I'm not asking anyone to blow up their lesson plans and their unit plans and all of this. Some people are planned way out there, you know, months ahead of time and all that good stuff, especially if you've been teaching for a while. But maybe you have to be able to finesse it a little bit. Maybe you need to be able to throw in some wrinkles. Maybe you need to call a small group up to the front of the, or the side of the room and reteach something, while other students who have the ability to learn more or faster or different, etc., are given additional content, or better yet, at a higher level of cognition, if you use Bloom's taxonomy as your metaphor, right? Once they've gotten knowledge and comprehension, they've gotten those bottom tiers of Bloom's taxonomy, now you're able to give them analysis and synthesis and the ability to evaluate all of those things that maybe these girls aren't ready for because they're still struggling with the basic content and knowledge. You have to give that to them, but everybody else is ready to go further. And you know that because you've tested. When I say tested, I don't mean a regular test. You've done some type of, anything from a Fiska 5 to many other techniques we hopefully will get to, that have given you the feedback that you need to start to make adjustments. And those adjustments are really part and parcel of what differentiated instruction is all about. Right? Differentiated comes with a fundamental mindset that every child is different, every child is a unique, special individual with her own set of gifts and her own situations, right? Sometimes it has nothing to do with her ability. Maybe there was something going on with the family, maybe something that happened elsewhere, and she's just not with you, for whatever the reason. So you get the feedback that you need, and then you're able to monitor and adjust accordingly. Please. You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a little caption that I think captures the idea. How do I get rid of that highlight thing? You'll tell me later. Let it. Did you erase it? No. Ta-da. Okay. By the way, I hope you're not grading this based on my SmartBoard performance. Got it. Okay. Do I have to do that every time? Touch that thing?
I don't know, not usually.
Okay. Can you now read this? I didn't want to distract you from the very powerful cartoon. I taught him. Right? Okay. All right. So now you should be looking at the handout that you received. It doesn't look like a PowerPoint, because it isn't, but it's designed to accompany your PowerPoint. There are some other handouts that I will give you soon, but here you have a quote. Would anyone like to volunteer to read it for us? Please.
Formative assessment is a planned process in which assessments elicited evidence of students' status is used by teachers to adjust their ongoing instructional procedures or by students to adjust their current learning tactics.
Okay, so what I want you to do as you're reading this is to identify in your mind the most important words from this passage that you think really capture the essence of formative assessment. Okay, in a moment I'll ask for volunteers. Anyone who calls out might have to go to the principal, but it's a different conversation. Okay. As soon as you feel yourself ready, please raise your hand and let me know, and I'll be happy to. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. By the way, you're lucky this is not Sotheby's over here, otherwise you would have bought that painting. Okay, anyone? Please.
I believe the key word here is adjust.
Adjust. Okay. Oh, right. Yes. Felt tip pen? Ballpoint?
Whatever you like.
Okay. I love ballpoint pens. Not this, but wait a minute, this is blue and that's red. Okay.
It's in the wrong way.
Passion of my son. Anyone else? Thank you for that.
I could give another one.
In a minute, if I don't have any other comments. Yes?
Me?
Yes?
Plan.
Plan? There we go, thank you. Okay, that again. What's behind door number 4? Okay, anyone else? Yes?
Assessment elicited evidence.
Got me, wow. Okay, red rules today. Anyone else? You said you had another one?
That was plan. I was gonna say.
Plan? Okay. Okay, so can anyone who so far has commented, yes, another one?
I think learning.
Learning. Bottom.
Right.
Got it. Just the word learning or learning tactics?
Learning that.
Okay, fine. Okay, I don't get paid extra for underlining more words, so I just want. Did anyone who underlined want to comment why you felt that to be important? Or does anybody else who agrees with them want to comment as to why? Not all at once here. Okay, how much coffee is there? All right, yes, please.
So I think that it's actually, there's two steps. One is plan process.
Yes.
Which has to be adjusted.
Okay. So you want me
In other
to put,
words,
you want
we
me to
have
put a
to-
1 and a 2?
Yeah, we have to plan, but then adjust according to the
Okay.
classroom.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
I just wanted to add to what she said.
Uh-huh.
We could plan, but if we're talking about formative assessment, the planning has to be based on evidence that we collect by the assessment.
Or perhaps the planning will lead us to the evidence that we will then collect. Is that reasonable
Okay.
also? Okay, so what I'm hearing, thank you, that was excellent. What I'm hearing is that this is not something that just happens. It's something that has to be planned. It's something which is designed to collect some type of, here's the word that I would sort of want to reinforce, which is evidence. Now, typically, probably don't think of yourselves as collecting evidence. You're probably not, planning to join the FBI anytime soon, right? That kind of forensic stuff, all that kind of thing. But really, as teachers, that's what we do more than anything else, or at least we should. Constantly collecting evidence that what we're trying to accomplish is actually happening. Otherwise, we're just sort of operating in the dark. Maybe it's working, maybe it's not, maybe she got it, maybe she didn't. But it's a planned process that allows me to collect the evidence because I'm building into my instructional practice on a regular basis. That I'm going to stop every so often, whether it's based on time, whether it's based on sort of the ebb and flow of the class and the content, in order to ensure that we're making progress over here. And then, based on what I have discovered, I'm going to willingly make adjustments accordingly. So I'm committed to my curriculum, but I'm flexible enough to make those adjustments to allow me to make sure that it's not just, I've taught it, but that they've actually learned it. Any questions or comments? Yes, please.
Are we talking about ensuring that the students learned what we taught? Or
Yes.
are we talking about engaging them on learning on their own
Primarily the former.
first?
Primarily the former. I mean, engagement is an underlying component for everything that we do. I don't know if this is going to help you, but this is
Adjusted on the menu.
I've spent a number of years in Washington Heights, so the colors got aligned just so. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyone else? Okay, so it's really a mindset, but we're focusing on the assessment piece of it for now. Clearly, if you're not engaging, in other words, if your class is, I remember when I do talks about differentiation and cooperative learning, I oftentimes give out quotes, various educators, things like this, and one of them is from a 5th grade student, and he's talking about a differentiated classroom, and he says, when I go to Miss So-and-so's class, every day it's like selecting from a menu. In the past, everything was peanut butter and jelly. And that's basically what it can be. In other words, yes, routine is important. It helps them, especially the younger children. But at the same time, you want to have variety. variety in what you do and how you do it, and engagement, all these kinds of things. But that's not our focus right now, okay? Okay, so here you have 3 different types of assessment. And it's interesting to me that so many educational concepts are expressed visually in pyramids, right? Bloom's taxonomy, certain other things as well, where we sort of have to have a strong foundation, and then we can build off of the foundation. What most people typically do is what we would call, what they call, you can see it did nothing. Okay, interim assessment, right? Summative assessment has to do with more that year-end exam, let's say the standardized tests, the regions, things like this, okay? Interim assessment is every 6 to 8 weeks, maybe more frequent, probably more frequent, okay? And then you've got formative assessment. Now the qualities of formative assessment, for those of you who cannot see it, is daily assessment, it's linked to the learning experience, it's assessing understanding and mastery of skills, and finally, it's data used to modify instruction. Okay, so this is what it is. And the reason it's at the bottom is because it's what we do the most, or at least what we should be doing most frequently. And that sort of builds you in terms of your assessment pyramid. I would argue that if you do a healthy dose of formative assessment, it almost makes this unnecessary. It almost makes it unnecessary. It still may have value. You might be familiar with the Ramban, Parachah Beis, Passaic Aleph of Lech Lecha, where he asks the question, why does Hashem need to test Avram if he knows the outcome? But if he knows what Avram is going to do, why does he bother to do it? And so Ramban introduces us to a famous concept of taking us me'akoach al hapoel. The idea of taking the internal potential and actualizing it and making it real. Okay? So it's not really our conversation, but so you might need the test for other purposes, but if you're doing this on a regular basis, you really don't need this so much. You certainly may choose to give this less value in your grade formula than you otherwise presently do. Because you're going to put more emphasis on regular classroom participation, on completion of a variety of things, almost like building a portfolio. When you build a portfolio, that can have a value. It doesn't all have to be based off of the almighty test, which has other implications, including, couldn't study the night before, bad test taker, test anxiety, yada, 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 all those issues with tests. Tests are also, by the way, not really a great reflection of the learning process. Meaning to say, if I'm teaching it auditorily and using a board and this and that, all of a sudden I take it into a different context and I give you a piece of paper and I ask you to complete it that way, I'm asking the students to take the information and learn it and sort of reconstitute it in a different fashion. So again, I'm not here to beat up on tests, but I just want you to know that formative assessment can be a more meaningful piece in what you do. Any thoughts about this? I'd rather get the blowback now and know that we're really committed to this moving forward. Please.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't make us digress, and if it does, you can just tell me to.
I'll just hit my digress button.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But what you just said about tests, if a student really understands the material, right? You say, a sign of whether we're able to teach something, how well we know it. So if we ask them to give it back to us, so to say, in a different way, doesn't that
It can.
show their mastery of the topic?
It can, and to a large degree, I think it will. But I think there are some students that won't necessarily find it the same way, won't necessarily process it the same way. Like, for example, we're going to get to this a little bit later. There's something called wait time. Wait time has to do with, you ask a question, how much time do you wait before you let the students respond? We'll get into the details of it a little bit later. But one of the benefits associated with waiting is to give students who don't have the same retrieval cues an opportunity to retrieve it either over a little bit more time, they just have a slower vehicle that they're driving to get them to the place, or they just need a different pathway. And so your test may or may not trigger. But ask the same question, take it from a piece of paper and present it to them orally, all of a sudden you may get a different response. There are students whose IEPs will say, test the individualized educational plan. We'll tell you to have them test them orally because they are auditory processors. Yeah, that's right. Okay? And so, yeah, on the one hand, you have to prepare them for life, all that good stuff, different conversation. On the other hand, we want to give them every opportunity to excel. Because if nothing else, it builds more. You talked earlier about the girls not wanting to participate or not fully into it, whatever. The more we build success, the more that success tends to self-perpetuate. Right? The more they feel that I can do it, they're more likely to try. Right? That has to do with grit and growth mindset and things like that, where you're sort of getting them to stretch a little bit. But you want to give them the basis by which to do that. Okay, please.
I just wanted to respond as well in another way. It's kind of like what we were talking about the progress reports before. If we wait until a test to do that, even if we're asking them to express it in a different modality, it's almost like too late. In other words, the idea of formative assessment, I understand, is that we're assessing them as they're learning. If it's a complex thing, we're making sure they understand steps 1, 2, and 3 before we test them on everything up to 8.
Okay, so, but if I can for just a second to your point, that's a valid and valuable point also, in the sense that normally, first of all, when I give a regular test, unless I do everything multiple choice with a bubble machine, it takes usually 3 to 7 days, roughly, for that test to then come back. Is that right? More or less? Fair? Unless some people are just very, very focused on it. I don't know how many students you have. Everybody's situation is different. But on average, you're talking at least 3 days until the test returns. By then, you are well into the next unit, right? And so if you're teaching history, like some of the gentlemen, for example, told me that they do, right? You're not going to go back now to that earlier unit. If you're teaching science, you're typically not going to do that. If you're teaching Parsha or Chumash, you're typically not going to do that. Maybe with math you would do that, because oftentimes the skills tend to build one on the other. And if you see you really dropped the ball, right, or they really didn't get it, then you might have to go back collectively and redo it. But in most cases, you're not going to. So a test is almost sort of a check mark at the end of a process, but it really doesn't usually serve as the basis for anything additional. It doesn't help you build to some better place, unless you work it out with an individual student. So the formative assessment also offers the benefit of being able to figure all this out as you go and to make those adjustments. Yes, please.
What I was going to say is it sounds like from the conversation just started, perhaps people think that the formative assessment necessarily needs like a grade attached. So apparently I've done formative assessment forever, but like sometimes I check off like after they've written down at the end of the class, like what did you learn or something, and I just check like the 5 points they all did it. Or,
Right.
but I mean, just for clarification, it's not like you're going to be graded and you have to collect something.
Well, right. It's low stakes. It's low stakes. It could be with a grade. It could be with a grade or without. That's up to you. But it's not going to have a very significant grade. And it's more. But I want to be clear. It's not a formality. It's a real. There's a real intent behind it. And then you use it to say, well, what do I need to do based off of it? Either I move forward, or I sort of cycle back and figure out how to fill in gaps that are clear based on. Sounds like you're using a 1-minute paper or something similar. We'll talk about it later if we can. Okay, any other thoughts or comments for now? Okay, yes.
I'm sorry, what's A divided B? I mean, summative assessment.
Good question. Annual, something or other.
Progress.
Yearly progress, well, annual, yearly is sort of redundant. I don't know, good question. No, not at all. Okay, so here we're gonna do something that's gonna get us up and moving a little bit. Just out of curiosity, again, fist to 5, please, jigsaw, cooperative method. You can kindly self-assess. If you've heard of it before, you're familiar with it, you can do a 4 or 5. Never heard of it before, would like to learn more, fist or 1. Can everybody kindly just give me a quick, just put it right over here, please, if you don't mind. Okay, again, I don't want anyone cheating, that's really important to me. Okay, that's, by the way, why you put the answers over here. You don't want everybody, in this case it doesn't matter, except for preserving the student's dignity. You want them to be honest, okay? That's a 5. Do you want to describe it for everybody?
Okay, basically you subdivide everyone into groups, and each group discusses one thing, and then you have someone in the group, so you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in each group, and then you remix the groups, and all the ones, let's say, get together, or the twos get together, and now you have, from whatever was discussed in the first group, they come and report to their new group and give it over. So it's like a jigsaw.
That was a great foundation. Thank you so much. So in effect, you're going to be part of 2 groups. You're going to be part of what we call an original group, which you actually don't really meet until the end. And then you're part of a focus group. Your focus group is going to, as its name implies, focus on specific content. Okay? And you're really trying to learn about it, make applications to it. You're actually going to get a graphic organizer by which to work on, or at least fill out information specific to it. I'm hopeful that the other piece that oh, it's here, thankfully. Excellent. Okay, so everybody's going to be part of a group. I just have to figure out our numbers. I didn't do that before because I was so busy with the technology. But the basic idea is that you're going to be part of this original group. Original group is just something you hold in your mind for the time being. You get into a focus group, you're going to focus actually on 3 formative assessment techniques. So on this list over here, I've got a total of, let's see how these were prepared. Are they front and back? Excellent. Okay, you've got really 13, but the last one's really long, so I'm not going to assign it to anybody. So one group, which we're going to call group number 1, is going to focus on 1, 2, and 3. Group 2, you don't know what group you're in yet, but I'll mention it again when we'll get into the specifics. By the way, whenever you do anything with cooperative learning, you want to try to ensure that everything is fully clear before the cats get out of the bag. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. It's called chaos. None of us like that, right? C is not for cookie, it's for chaos, and that's a problem. Okay, 4, 5, and 6 would be for group 2. Group 3 would do 7, 8, and 9. And group 4 would do 10, 11, and 12. Gentlemen, we can talk in a minute about where you fit into this. We'll make sure that you are happy somehow. Okay, but in the interim, we're going to focus primarily on the ladies so that they can get initiated. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and so I said 3 per group, and we have 4 groups, right? So that means by the time that we're done, you're going to come back to a group of 4. Is that right? You're going to come back to a group of 4 so that each of you can report. Okay, so let's do it like this. As we count off, please identify yourself as an A, a B, a C, or a D. And please do go in order. Otherwise, that will get us confused. Okay, so is everybody ready? As I point to you, please just sound off the next letter. And if you are D, the person next to you should become A. Are you joining in this process? In, out? You'll let me know. When I get to you, you'll say yay or nay. Please.
We'll observe.
You're group 1, A, B, C, D.
We'll be busy assessing.
See? Is this person here? Okay, so we include her? She's coming. We'll call her D. Yes or no? Skip? Okay. C and D. Okay, 1 second please everyone. So group 1, group 2, and the 2 of you, actually you know what, I should do it this way because it will make it easier for you later. Can I make it C and D? Okay, you'll be group 3. Well, reversing order now. D. Okay, beautiful. And then we'll be and somebody's going to have to figure that out later. Can you be D with them? Okay, this is where we're up to, right? Good. C, D. Okay, nobody get up just yet? 1 second. And you can be whatever you want. Whatever you want. Okay, all A's, kindly raise your hand. If you're an A, please raise your hand. If you're an A, please raise your hand. Doesn't mean you got an A on anything just yet. You got to work a little bit before you get that A. Okay, B's, please raise your hand. C's, kindly raise your hand. And the D's. Okay, this is what we're going to do. All the A's are going to come over here. Now there's a bunch. I would encourage you to break up into 2 groups for each letter. But you don't have to. That's your choice. You're all very mature. You're all able to do whatever you wish. I'm just making a suggestion. Because I want everybody to have a voice. In class, I would probably mandate that we break up into smaller groups. Because cooperative learning, you never want it to be more than 4 people. And ideally, you want it to be face-to-face. So that everybody sees each other and they're hearing one another. Okay? The B's are going to come over here. All the B's, please look over this way so you don't get confused later. You don't go north when I say south. C's over here. And then the D's, please, to come over here. Where are the A's going? Please point. Where are the B's going? And the C's, please. And finally, where are those D's going? Okay, so before you go anywhere, okay, I know you're anxious. I got it, I'm with you. All right, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to give this out as quickly as we can without causing bedlam. Can you please circulate on this direction for now? Can you kindly take one and make sure everybody gets one? And can I give this over here? If you could take one and please also work it sort of in this direction. Anyone who doesn't get one, please let me know. I have another thing to give out. Make sure it circulates this way. Please take one and make sure it circulates this way. Okay, this one goes in the middle. Try not to all jump on it at the same time, but please make sure everybody gets it. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 60 seconds to make sure you have these 2 papers. If you don't have either, I don't know what will happen to you. So please, for your well-being, make sure you get one of each. They're coming around. Nobody should get up yet, please. Please remain seated. Okay. If you don't have a sheet, I've got more of these. Does anyone need one of these? Yes, yes, yes. There should be extras of both. Here. Extra chart. Who needs one? More? More? Here? More? Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If you could please take this document. Does anyone not have one? Please take this document and number where it says 1, 2, and 3. Number the 3 you're going to be working on. So if you're an A, you're going to keep it as 1, 2, 3. If you're a B, you're going to write 4, 5, 6. If you're a C, you're going to write 7, 8, 9. If you're a D, you're going to write 10, 11, 12. Okay? What I want you to do, I'm going to say it once and then I'm going to try to get some feedback to make sure I was clear. In the box that says technique, just write the name, they call it strategy. You're going to write the name of the strategy. So if you're doing number 1, you're going to write equity sticks. If you're doing number 8, you're going to do KWL. You just write it in the box. Next to under basic description, you're going to write just a few words that briefly summarizes and describes what this is. When you get into it. And then for applications, this is the part that is really your own special contribution to the paper. I'm asking you to think about what you teach, who you teach, and how could this be relevant and useful in your specific classroom. Remember, right now you're a learner. In a few minutes' time, you're going to become a teacher. And you're going to be sharing what you learned with your colleagues. And then everyone's getting a test. And this way, if you were effective in teaching your class or your group, they will perform well. And then if you do really nicely, the administration told me I can offer you extra recess. Okay? Okay, one last time before we get up. Where are the A's going? And the D's? Okay, everybody else is in between. All right? Face to face, let's get started. You got about 5 minutes to focus on your 3 items. Love to be able to review as many of these as we can. But before we do, any feedback about the process that we just used? Please. For 1 second, I just need to make sure everybody can hear you.
The advantage of this process that I saw is that every single girl becomes a teacher, so even your weakest students get sorted into a role of leadership and being listened to.
Great. Okay, I do want to add, if I may, coming back to another one of those educational pyramids, you might be familiar that there's one that details the level of retention. Certain behaviors have been found to promote certain levels of memory and retention. Listening is on the bottom. Just listening alone with doing nothing additional is on the bottom, maybe 10%, maybe 20, no more than that. If you take notes, it's going to increase. If you review, it's going to increase. There's certain things we know. The highest predictor or what's the word I'm looking for? Correlator, I'm not sure exactly. The item that most likely predicts that you will remember for longer with greatest clarity is if you become a teacher. Okay? Right? It's just the way it is. And so the more you can turn your students into teachers, either in a jigsaw or other formats, you're going to help them remember. And if I may for just 1 second, I hate to keep doing this to you, but one of the things I also talk to teachers about a lot, I don't know if you've had this experience, it happened to me a couple of times along the way, where you teach something, you think you did a pretty good job, right? And they got it, they were studying it, they were remembering it, you discussed it, and everyone was clear, you took a test and they aced it. And the next week you sort of referred back to it. You ever had that? And all of a sudden they're laughing, I didn't have to finish my sentence, and you know what I'm talking about. You refer back to it and it's whoosh, like you never taught it before, right? Now, depends on how you retrieved it, depends on pathways, all sorts of interesting things that we're starting to learn about our mind and how it works. But the more that you can do to promote retention, the more I think all of us feel that we have fulfilled our roles as whatever you call yourself, teacher, facilitator of learning, facilitator of memory, it doesn't matter. It's that we all feel this emptiness when I spent all this time, I was so creative, I came up with all of these ideas, and where did it go? Right? Where did it go? So the more we can do to focus on retention, to build it into your lesson plan. I know it's not really, as it is, we're thinking about objectives and, inputting and how do we input and checking for understanding and all this kind of stuff, and all of it is valuable. But every day I think you should ask yourself, what am I doing to promote retention? What am I doing to help students remember? Am I giving them visuals? Am I giving them opportunities to repeat it over and over again? Am I putting it to them perhaps in song? Right? Sometimes, I know some of you teach Jewish history. I used to teach some of the more complicated things, or not complicated, just the more monotonous things with song. So if I was teaching, for example, the 5 zugos, the 5 pairs following Antigonus Ishtocha, who was a student of Shimon HaTzadik, you had Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan, Yeshua ben Bracha, and Itar Beli. You had those lists. Okay? So if you, I don't know how many of you feel comfortable in your own space to do this, but it works very well with Karbach saying Kelokenu, just in case you remember. Yossi ben Yoezer, Yossi ben Yo. And I had students who had no connection to any of it 2 years later as seniors, and this was not exactly Yeshiva Katana. This was a different type of school. They'd come, they'd hear it, of course seniors wandering the hallways. It's a very rare concept. But it did actually happen in our building, and they'd walk right in and they would start as if they were just there yesterday. Okay, and from Hillel, from Shimon, from the descendants of Hillel, I think it's 7 of them. Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Yehuda, Gamliel Yehuda. Okay, that works well to Karbach Yachad. Perfect, actually. Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Gamliel, Shimon Yehuda, Gamliel Yehuda. Perfect. It works. Okay, and then all of a sudden it's a whole different experience, and they remember it. How do you think I remember it? I haven't taught it for 10 years. Okay, because I put it to song. So whatever you do, think about retention. Any other thoughts about the experience, the process? I know it was long. I get that. So that's an issue we have to deal with. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just, something came up. I remember we had a speaker one time with last year, I think Chris was here, you may remember this. A speaker spoke with and the girls have some account where like, we never heard these concepts talked about before. And I think, I don't remember what the speaker was. I think like one of us said, we had just talked about that in our classroom, but really Baruch bits about classroom. And what I learned, and I saw this in another school, is they can be wonderful students and they could really want to learn and hear and know. And they'll sometimes say, we never talk about Hashkafa, or we never learn about X, Y, and Z. Or all these questions. Every single class you have is like talking about that. What I learned is that you need to verbally say, 1 second, we are talking fundamentals. Stop. Process. This may be answering a question you have. Have them think, what question are we answering? What are we talking about? And then, we talk about that. Like, and it sounds so...
Change the language. Yeah. I'm going to jump to your point. To your point, I just wanted to alert you to something you're going to get a little bit later. I have a packet here of graphic organizers. Some of you may be more familiar, some of you less, I don't know. There's one in particular that you may want to focus on specific to your question. It's called a KWL. I happen to think it's one of the most underrated and underutilized graphic organizers out there. K stands for what do I know, W stands for what do I want to know, and L stands for what have I learned. Now, the K could be on any topic. It could be you're teaching the Akedah, it could be you're teaching Hilchos Sukkah, it could be you're teaching, about a particular period in history or science. What do you know? And of course, the more specific you can be, the more focused their answers will be, and they'll fill that in. What do I want to know about this topic? What interests me? What intrigues me? What questions do I have that when I learned it in 3rd grade I didn't get? That now that I'm a 9th or 10th or 11th grader or senior, I have a more sophisticated and mature focus, and I have questions that have been in the back of my mind forever, and I really would like for us to focus on these during our conversation. And then at the end, I don't know if you've had this before, but sometimes it happens with my kids. So-and-so, what'd you do in school today? What'd you learn in school today? Exactly. So now you have evidence of what I learned today, and they make them actually write it. Now, of course, they might put it in their notes, and that's okay. You can say, see notes page 127B, or whatever, it doesn't matter, but at least they're actually acknowledging that I learned something, and you're making them review it and take ownership of it. Now, just as an aside, since we're on the topic, I'll just mention the KWS. The KWS is really good for research because it asks you, what do you know about your topic? What do you want to know about your topic? And then what are the sources you may choose to pursue in order to find more information? How will you learn more about your topic? So again, we'll come back to this a little bit later, but at least it shines the light, I think, to your question about, hey, we already learned this, right? Okay, everybody, take out your KWLs from last week, and you'll see, right, when that speaker gets up to talk, you can show that you've actually discussed it as well. And I think it'll make it easier for them, and of course, it'll remind them more readily because they actually took the time to write it down and to really own what it was they discussed. Any other thoughts? Thank you. Any other thoughts about the process we just engaged in? Yes?
I'm sorry, I stepped out, I don't know if anybody asked it, but in here,
Yes.
we're all teachers, right?
Uh-huh.
So everybody with their different skills was really able to explain things. But
Right.
in a student classroom, we have such a variation.
Uh-huh.
There are students who don't seem to have the ability to really explain things effectively to other
Okay.
people. So how could you rely on this?
That's a good question. I think that you have a few approaches you could consider. The question for those of you who didn't hear it had to do with if you have different levels in your class and you have certain students that, you don't want to call them the weak link, but they're really not necessarily capable of doing the same level of work of some of the others. And then, right, he's going to give me a quiz, which, by the way, you were so well behaved I decided not to give you a quiz, just so that you know. But besides for that, if he's going to give me a quiz and I'm going to be held accountable for it, and Suri can't do it, where does that leave me? So you have to be a little bit, mindful of that. The ideal arrangement in any cooperative setting is sort of your bell curve, where you've got different levels within the group. It doesn't always work out that way. Today I didn't bother to try to even do that, and I wouldn't have been able to, but you know your class. And so you can determine groups based off of that. And then you can decide, is there going to be some content that might be simpler, more straightforward, and that you might choose to strategically find a way to make sure that each one gets a packet that's relevant and appropriate for them. It's not a perfect system, but you may have to be mindful of where everybody is and how can I create a level of contribution from everybody without sort of penalizing the rest of the group that didn't get this. Or maybe you make it very low stakes, so that with the quiz, it appears once, or something like that. Sort of reduces that anxiety. Did someone else?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
thinking, if in that first group, they all have to write down the decisions they come to, a
Uh-huh.
girl who can't really teach, but has it written down before she discusses with other girls,
Right.
could
Right.
give it over.
Yeah, you could do that. Or you could create focus group with simpler content. Either way could work. Thank you. There was a hand over here? Yes.
I just think, we had an idea that might help.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind.
We had an idea that might help that we had 2 A's and 2 B's and 2 C's and 2 D's.
Yes?
So you could really have, some girls don't get a chance, but then if you're worried about that, you could have 1 D will give it and 1 D will sit there. You could do that also.
Okay, so again, you have to make it work for yourself. The reason I feel comfortable sharing ideas that don't always fit perfectly in different classrooms is because I'm talking to teachers who are the most creative people in the world. And so I know that you have the ability to think about not just your content, but also your way of which to make it work for you. And that's really what I'm sort of relying upon in the process. But if there's specific questions about it that we need to take offline, we can do that. Okay, so here you have a bunch, and we're going to go through all of these slide by slide. So I just want to introduce them to you in case you lost me in terms of your packet. We are up to, finally, number 2. Okay. We're going to talk about sampling, signal and response, and summaries for short responses.
Original.
Original.
Sorry, this one. Okay. Sampling, I know it seems like we spent all this time on this one little paragraph, but the reality is you did a lot of work, just not on that paper. That's okay. All right? Checking for understanding, which is another way really of communicating formative assessment. Checking for understanding is all about, did they understand what I wanted them to learn? So you could sample, and again, I'm going to give you examples in just a moment. Sample means you don't ask everybody, but you sample from throughout the class. We typically do that anyway. Signaled response would be some of the things we've already started to learn, right? You state something about Ramban's opinion, and you deliberately make a question incorrect. So you say to the students, if what I say to you is correct, please demonstrate that like this with a C. If, on the other hand, you think it's wrong, please put an I for incorrect. Okay? Or, if you just taught 3 different theories or 3 different concepts, so you have an A, a B, and a C, if the answer is A, please go like this. If the answer is B, please show me with this. and the answer is C, please put 3 fingers over here. Okay? Simple responses like that. It happens, it's gotten to a point, by the way, where there's some schools where I do coaching, and I walk in there, and the kids are already starting to take out their fingers, go like this, all their shtick, because they know it's coming. Okay? Some reason short response that we'll get into, but basically some type of brief summary of what we discussed. Okay? Again, I'm just giving you the global, and then we're going to go into it slide by slide, so you don't need to write anything at this time. List charts and graphic organizers. So I gave you, for example, a graphic organizer before. That's what you were working off of, right? I showed you another example of a graphic organizer with the KWL. You're familiar, I'm sure, with a Venn, with the overlocking circles. I'll give you a sample of that too. By the way, whatever I give you, the graphic organizer, are all available for free on Houghton Mifflin's website. There are others, there are tons of them available for free online. And even though it says on the side over here, all rights reserved, it says very clearly on the website that it may be duplicated at no charge for educational purposes or classroom use. I forget the exact language. Okay? Did somebody have a question? Okay? These others I'm just going to leave for now and explain or describe them as we go. Okay, so here you have examples of checking for understanding. Thumbs up, thumbs down we looked at before, right? If you think that this is a good idea, you don't think it's a good idea if you're not sure, maybe something in between. Okay? I talked about the fingers, except for I would encourage you not to do like this. You know, there's some research from a professor, I think the last name was Ash, in the 1950s, I believe, where he had students in his graduate level class looking at lines. Ooh, I don't know if that happened. Okay. Looking at lines where one was clearly longer than the other. And they were on the same sheet of paper. And the students were in a class, maybe there were 30 of them in the room, 25 of them had been told ahead of time that this was a study. 5 of them had no clue. And so the 5 who had no clue were brought in and were asked to determine the longer, the shorter, all of this. And over time, with a lot of social pressure and a lot of other factors, I believe 4 out of the 5 eventually admitted that the shorter line was in fact longer, that the longer line was shorter. That sounds crazy, right? Right? This is a fact, you can measure it, everybody can see it. But sometimes, if everybody thinks that way, it must be true. And there is some real psychology here. So when we talk about putting up your answers, I remember very distinctly being in a 6th grade class, me being a 6th grader at the time. And at the time we were sort of seated in the same type of U configuration with everybody on the outside. And the Rebbe was in the middle of the room. And he asked a question, I don't recall what the question was, and we went around the room. And every child responded yay or nay or whatever the comment was. And miraculously, every time the conversation got to a kid who was universally recognized as being of the brightest, if that child changed the answer from what it had been, all of a sudden the next few students fell in line very neatly until the next smart kid sort of changed it again, and then it sort of worked its way around differently. So that was always been my sort of experiential learning with regards to the impact of social pressure and not really knowing.
The teacher has a say in that.
What do you mean?
The teacher, if the teacher does not go for that,
Yes.
and the teacher has a very safe environment in
Yes.
the class,
Uh-huh.
I really believe that even people who are usually affected by the social pressure can have a more comfortable classroom.
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. But
You're their social pressure.
They're still
Right,
looking
but-
around, they are.
right, so I do. So
They tell them.
in all fairness, because this really is sort of a sidebar, all I was trying to bring out here is that if you put the answer here instead of here, right, that just minimizes the amount of external, right, you'll see whose kid's head is on a swivel. You'll see who's going, oh, which way did he go, George, right, you'll know that. But the rest of them, at least you'll see who really kind of got it on their own and who needed to look at somebody else in order to get some guidance and a little bit of support. Here you have, as we'll see, portable whiteboards. They're not very expensive. You can get them at USA Toys or whatever they call that place, or any other types of educational things. Everyone's got one at their desk. You ask a question, everybody turns their answer around and shows it to the class. Shows it to the teacher. This way, everybody's responding. So this is very good for what's called active learning. Active learning means you're involving everybody, which nobody mentioned before about the jigsaw, but to me that was evident. Everybody was involved, everybody was learning. The energy level was very high. The level of engagement was very high. Now, could you do this every day for 40 minutes? Probably not. But if you were strategic about it, you could do it on occasion and get great results from it. And again, it's not peanut butter and jelly every day. So it adds a little bit of variety. Here, you're getting everybody to respond. There's another cooperative technique, it's called numbered heads together, or numbered heads, where everybody has a number like you did before, and then you discuss, you learn, whatever it might be. Then you call all the ones to the front of the room. So one per group with their whiteboard. And you give them a problem and they all complete it, and they turn their answer around. If they get one, they get a point for the team. And if they don't get a point for the team. And what is the end game of this? Every class could be different. But you could say the team that wins gets an extra percentage on their whatever. Okay, you're giving them a motivation, you're giving them an incentive to perform. Obviously, when you do it at their seats, there's less of an issue of embarrassment, things like that. You have to know what works in your environment, but at least these are ideas for us to consider. Any questions over here, any comments? Okay, now I want to impress one other thing to you, because this I think is really important. Some of you might be concerned, oh my goodness, this is going to take all my time, right? The administration is going to be down my throat anyway to make sure I finish my curriculum, and how am I going to fit in all this extra stuff? So it is a conversation in and of itself. How do you create more efficiency in your classroom? And you might agree with me if I told you that we can be highly inefficient at times. We can be. Certain things like taking attendance, right? Or other things that maybe we could, instead of just making it a formal thing where we take 60 seconds to 2 minutes to do these types of processes, either we task it to a student or we do it, while they're already working in something, we get them moving with a bell ring or whatever those might be. But in addition to that, you oftentimes have students who are sort of sucking out the time from the class because you've already now repeated it for the 27th time in order to make sure she understands it and everybody else is sort of waiting around. It's all about efficiency, it's all about doing the right thing for the right student. So the more you've got techniques that are working, that give you guidance about who knows what, then you can sort of plug in the right strategy, the right approach for each group, make the time better used for them. Let them go deeper. Right? The gift is, I think we've done some good work. I think there's a lot more to do with the special education population in our building, in every building. Right? Special ed has become more front and center than it was 20, 30 years ago. Certainly when we were in school, there's a lot more resources invested into it and a lot more awareness and consciousness from the teachers, the regular ed as well as the special ed, about what a special ed profile looks like and meeting those children's needs. But the children that I think that suffer, if you can call it that, the most, in terms of awareness of what they need and fulfilling what they need, are the gifted population. I think the students that are very, very capable often suffer because they are not engaged at their level. And they're forced to listen to the same thing over and over when they got it the first time. So what are we doing to help them? So often we turn them into glorified teacher's aides. They go around and maybe they help Chani with her work because Chani didn't get it, so she becomes Chani's helper. That has a place. She becomes a teacher. It can be useful. Sometimes she becomes the gopher running the papers down to the machine, or some other task you might give her. But you're really not meeting her needs at her level. So the more you're aware of Bloom's taxonomy, the more you ask them to do something to actually, right, what did it feel like for Avram Avinu to have to deal with the command of the Akedah, considering who he was and what he believed and what he proposed to the world and all these things about monotheism and a loving God and that we don't do human worship, whatever it might be. You sort of paint the picture. Now, experience what it'd be like for Avram Avinu. What are the challenges so that they appreciate more deeply what he accomplished with the Nisayon. And you don't feel comfortable with that, go with something else, whatever that might be. But at least you're getting them to a place that you wouldn't otherwise engage them at. And the benefit for them could be significant. There were two questions. We'll go 1 and 2, please. Yes?
That oftentimes the efficiency in the classroom requires more work for the teacher beforehand.
Absolutely.
That if you really cover all the ground and scaffold it properly and structure, like with some kind of aid or something like that. Let's say you're teaching the Makos, right? And there's different opinions of the divisions between the Tzachdash and Achad. And then you create a chart and it's going to go through to the Mefarish. Not every Mefarish has to be gone through you teaching it word by word. There's a place for them to also maybe go through it and be able to fill in that chart and then see the whole thing. But that often requires more work on the part of the teacher.
Certainly does, yeah, without question. And I think that the good news is that if you are in that mindset, this by the way is more about differentiation also, you have more materials at your disposal. Nobody's going to ask you, Caroline Tomlinson is the name most associated with differentiated instruction. She kind of developed the concept in 20 plus years ago, and it's not she didn't develop it really. I mean, the Mefarshim, they talk about it in the Passaic of Chanoch Lenar Al Pi Darko. If you understand what Al Pi Darko is, if you look at the Rabbad, if you look at Malbim, if you look at some others, they talk about Radak. But regardless, the idea of differentiation, she says, is that you can't possibly develop your entire toolkit in one setting or one sitting. It's going to take years often to really have the full battery of materials. Those who teach general studies have it easier, without question, because online there's a lot available for those of you who go online. For those of you who teach Limudei Kodesh, it is harder, without question. But at the same time, it can be done if you're in the mindset of doing it. And the more you think about it as you develop your lessons, the more you'll have it as part and parcel of what you do. But as you're planning this parsha, how am I meeting the needs of different learners? How am I creating resources that those kinds of students will ultimately benefit from?
So I have material I can give to the students that are more advanced, like activity sheets, whatever. But I find that, when offered, they don't want it because it's extra work. Oh, no, Mrs. Bell, thank you anyway, right? So it might be just a conversation for afterwards or whatever, but what would we do to either, I guess, maybe force them or convince them that they should do it? And then how do you grade it? Because then what are they getting a grade for their thing but not the other thing? And then is that fair? Because then administration gets involved, I guess, at some point, so you would have to tell us what your idea is on it, and then we'd tell them, but,
so
the work is there for them.
It is a bigger
it's
conversation.
hard to get them to...
It is a bigger conversation, and again, with the time we have, I probably can't get too involved.
Okay.
I do think, though, on your basic premise, that fairness and equal are not synonymous. Okay, I think in other words, we know that. Getting our students to understand that is important too. And by the way, getting the parents sometimes of students to understand it is also true. And I do think that part of the problem we have is that we're boxed into a continuum. In other words, we don't get them in a vacuum. We get them from K to, let's say, your 10th grade. So K through 9 had one part, and then you've got to move them into the next part of their chain, from 11th grade into college or into seminary or into all of the above, whatever it might be. So you sort of feel trapped by, I have to follow the rules that everybody plays by. And that can also be a little bit difficult. On the other hand, if you can create a culture that says that my job in this classroom is not to teach all of you the same thing. My job in this classroom is to give all of you what you need to grow and to be successful. And that may look very different for different people in the class, and you'll see that over the course of the year. Some students might get certain work, and other students might get other work, because I feel at the time, I'm going to use my judgment. I am a teacher, I'm experienced, I'm going to try to do this best I can. I'm going to use my judgment to give you what I think you need to help you grow. And the expectation also is that you don't just you're finished and then it's vacation. It's I move on to the next thing. I want all 42 minutes, or whatever the exact time is of each period, to be well utilized. We don't have a lot of instructional time. We have to make it work. We have to use it to the best of our ability. So that's the Cliff Notes answer, but there's more to discuss. Okay, so here you have some examples of sampling. Right? Be ready to summarize the difference. What do you believe were? And then you sort of walk them through the various answers. These are all limudei chol. I'll get to the Kodesh in just a moment. Okay? How do you estimate? Walk me through the process. And you're going to sample. That means you're not going to ask everybody, but you're putting it out there for everybody to think about. And then you're going to select, whether it's by raise of hand or whether by you just choosing certain students to respond. Okay? In Limudei Kodesh, you might choose these instead. Right? What do you believe? What made Moshe Rabbeinu so wonderful, so great? You can ask them that question. Everybody has different ashkafas and how they want to approach that. But you give them questions that they can think about. Right? Talk about gematria, or perhaps the difference between Rashi and Ramban. Right? You put the question there. You ask them to think about it, and then, of course, you probe for responses. I'm sorry for running through that quickly. This is the wait time idea we talked about before. This is relevant to the previous question, because oftentimes you have students whose retrieval speeds are fast. Now, they might be so fast that so often their hand shoots up before the question is finished. You might have experienced that. And then the answer you get is oftentimes off base as a result, because they never really heard the question. I think it's good practice for you to tell everybody, I'm going to put a question out there. I'm not going to ask for hands for 5-7 seconds. I want you to think about it. Just stay quiet, and when I indicate, you can raise your hand, at which point you then start to field responses. That's going to give you, first of all, it levels the playing field. It involves more of the girls because the slow processors are not necessarily less capable, they just don't get it as quickly, okay? And then you have also the fact that maybe they just need a different pathway. There's a woman I remember, I'm going to probably have to end a little bit earlier, but I just want to mention this idea before we wrap up, because I think you'll find this enlightening. About when I first started in education, this was back about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit less. I was living and working in Chicago at the time. And there was a woman from Peoria, Illinois, which is a town, city in Illinois, about 5 hours south, maybe a little less. And she came up, she was an expert on memory. And she talked about different things that she did in order to ensure that students would remember, including, forgive me for saying this, wearing the same outfit the entire unit, so that all the information will be associated with their clothing. That's all I will say on the matter. Okay. The point, I noticed how that one went over. The point that I wanted to mention, though, is you might have seen this before. The students will take a test. You're sitting there at your desk, and they're down there scribbling, writing, all the diligent stuff they're doing, and then all of a sudden they do this. You see that? They look up at you, or they look up around you, and they go back because they're looking for retrieval cues. They're looking for something to jog their memory. And sometimes you are the retrieval cue. And the more that you can do to create those kind of pathways to bring them back to the learning, that's really what good test taking is about. Some of it is analysis, some of it is all that other stuff, but some of it is really having the ability to take the test and know how to get the information. I hate the language, but I'm going to use it just so you understand. They often say that if you have students who have a difficult time remembering information for a test, have them do a mind dump, which means on the margin of the test, at the very beginning, are there things that never got beyond your short-term memory? The frontal lobe, right? So they might, okay, if they do it on their own, then somebody already taught them. But if they don't, or if you see that there's a student that deals with this issue, you might want to advise her and say, look, it's a fascinating thing. If I bring it into the test in here, and then a second later I put it on the paper, that's kosher. If I bring it into the test on a piece of paper, that's treif, chazer treif. Right? That's the real, right? What's the difference? The difference is when I wrote it down on the paper. Because I had it in my brain, but I had it there for just a second. But that's okay. If that's the rules we play by, then let them play by the rules. And let them succeed in the rules that we've created. So to summarize, because we do have to stop, we talked today, there's more. I'm going to give out the graphic organizers as I review, just so that you have them. And you can look at them. They're pretty self-evident about what they're useful for. In terms of creating different ways for not only for students to process information, but also to give you evidence of learning. And I would also ask you to research the words 1 minute paper if you haven't jotted it down. It's a very good technique, sort of like a summary at the end of class, almost like an exit ticket of sorts, but a little bit more clearly defined. If you don't get one, I have more, so just, it's coming around. Okay, no problem. As we summarize or as we wrap up, we spent, I think, a lot of time today in two primary areas. Number one, kind of making the case that we're here not to teach, we're here to ensure the learning of the students. Granted, if we don't teach it, they can't learn it. But we can't be satisfied just with the fact that I said the words. We have to dig a little bit more deeply to ensure that the learning occurred, and we need to do it on a regular basis so that we don't just keep going when we leave a percentage of our class behind. The second part, most of our conversation, was focused on the jigsaw exercise where you had opportunity to learn about many of these strategies in action and obviously make applications, think about how they were relevant for you in your classroom. I would encourage you to mix it up. You don't want to use the same ones all the time. It gets a little bit boring and a little bit monotonous. And obviously you know that you're dealing with high school students, so you need to know which ones you think will work best. But I think they like the opportunity to be engaged. I think they like the opportunity to respond. I think at the end of the day, passivity is not the mode we want to sort of promote in our classroom. And the more that everybody knows that when you put a question out there, or every time you're going to read something, there's going to be something behind it for you to complete, so that you know that there's going to be accountability and a collection of evidence. that the learning actually occurred. You're going to get more purposeful and focused thinking and listening at the beginning, and you're going to get better quality on the back end. And you'll know where you're at, so that if in fact you do need, I'll just show you this, I don't know it's going to force me to go through, it's too long, but there's a slide at the very end that talks about monitoring and adjusting. This is the FISTA 5 we looked at before. See if you can keep up with me. I'm sort of really taxing its capacity here. Okay. Yeah, so it's going to be a couple more slides, but I just want you to see the idea that you monitor and adjust. Here's the one, oh, sorry. Actually, go back to that for just a second. Here's an example of a 1-minute paper. Most useful thing we learned in class today. Most important thing, 3 most important things. Limudei Kodesh, you might be uncomfortable asking them to judge this versus that, but you might say 3 important things we learned today. Something very positive. Okay? What do you feel least confident about? Where do you want more clarification? Okay, and they give you that feedback. You get it for the next day. You can now revisit it and discuss. And then finally, getting over here to this, it's coming. Here it is. Okay, you monitor and adjust. So usually you're going to be hopefully somewhere in this range, right? But sometimes you might be here. If they're totally not with you, you might just shut it down and do something else. If they're stumbling along, you may choose to reteach. If they're getting there, you want to give them more opportunities to practice. And if they've arrived, you just keep on going. So you have to figure out, where am I in the continuum? Of course, it's not going to be an all or nothing proposition. Typically, you're going to have different students in different places. And so you have to make decisions. This group I'm going to reteach over here. This group is ready for more. This group something else. But that's where your creativity and flexibility comes into play. Okay? So I think we met at least most of my goals and objectives for our time together. Again, thank you all for your active participation. I checked your understanding, and I think you did it. So you are now all officially dismissed unless the administration has other plans for you.